Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the sixth episode of Making Seamless Sales Show. I'm Art Fromm, based in Mars, Pennsylvania, founder and president of Team Sales Development, and sharing ideas on this show based on my sales and sales enablement career. As I think about it, it actually has spanned quite a bit of history, from mainframe days to distributed computing to virtual desktops to cloud and now to AI. And most of my experience has been in the area of enterprise systems, enterprise information management, and all things related to, say, IT, telecommunications, software, and all that. And I also support supply chain customers as well right now. So if you would, please make sure that you like, share, subscribe, check out teamsalesdevelopment.com with the event page for information about this show and the other shows that we have on. We'll get to our guest here in a little bit. Just a quick note about last week's show on September 4th, which was episode 5, and Anil. So Anil was on, he's the CEO of CloudFronts, and we had a really great discussion about what he does in terms of being a Microsoft and now Databricks partner. So he's not only doing the Microsoft implementation for CRM systems and all kinds of Microsoft cloud solutions, but he's also doing Databricks, which is very aligned with his strategy to focus on AI, with the idea being that AI requires good data. Kind of reminds me of back in the day when we did relational databases, going from manual stuff to relational databases and having to clean up the data so that the AI doesn't over hallucinate. We know it already hallucinates enough, but the fact is that now that he's doing Databricks as well, he's got the data cleansing and all that under what he does. He also is doing, and the big emphasis now that we talked about was agentic AI. So the idea there is that, AI is one thing when we use it for chat GPT and stuff like that. Agentic AI is where you have the AI as your personal agent. And whether it's helping you to sell and get messages out, whether it's helping you with your own personal guide and what you're doing in a sales world, it's about helping you maybe with your methodology to see if you're doing that properly, or just digging into data. When's the last time that I talked with this person about this and what were the conclusions and so forth? And that agentic AI can help. So Microsoft, of course, has Copilot that they, have as part of their system, and Anil helps with that. And then it reminded me, which we didn't get a chance to talk about on the show, but one thing about my sales opportunity snapshot solution that some of you know about is the snapshot itself, which is 9 key criteria with 9 really important pieces of information that are gathered from hello all the way through implementation and renewals. That gets recorded every time there's a change in the sales process. So in the sales stages, when an opportunity moves through sales stages, that information gets saved. So agentic AI would be a great candidate to ask your CRM system, when a deal got stuck, what did it look like? What happened? Or when the deal moves quicker through the process, what does that look like as far as why that's happening? So check that out. That was last week, again on September 4th, episode 5. And then next next week, this coming week, episode 7 is going to be with Chris Smith. Chris Smith is somebody who helps companies with CRM systems. And specifically, he has a book which sits on my bookshelf right here, and I'll get it out for the show next week, which is CRM Shouldn't Suck. And the idea is that he's engaged by companies that have what appear to be problems with their CRM. And then, of course, as he digs deeper, he often finds out that it's not just the CRM system, it's the people, the process, the tools, things like that. So this is where we can run into opportunities to improve business process improvement or sales methodology improvement or tool improvement. We'll talk about that. Sales in general, anybody on here that's doing sales, and if you have a CRM system, even if you're not in sales, I know some people that aren't really in sales, but their company still has a CRM system to manage client data. Sometimes you feel like that CRM system is just not helpful. And for many salespeople, they feel like it doesn't help them sell. And that's because a lot of times the data is being put in there for the purpose of helping management. What we want to do is see the way that we can have the CRM system be helpful for us. And today my guest is going to talk about sales management. And so when we get into that, we'll talk a little bit about not specifically the CRM, but what type of data should be looked at and how is that going to help with the sales team. So again, tying these all together, last week, Anil said when he saw the system he developed, because he developed the app for me for my sales methodology, he said it really is the missing link of CRM because the methodology itself should help people sell. And then if the methodology is inside the CRM system, and the method is implemented in a tool that's helpful. Now the salesperson is in the CRM. They're doing things that they like. They know that it's helping them sell. Management now has the ability to inspect it real time and it's accurate live data. And if it's a methodology like sales opportunity snapshot, it's data that has to be defendable. So you can't put information in there unless you could, swear by it and that it's favorable to your company and that it's something that you've confirmed. Basically, we call it flawless from a flawless source. What we're really meaning there is that we've triangulated from multiple people to confirm that what we're hearing is true. Because I'm a salesperson, in my current business of providing consultative selling, I was a salesperson. Brian, when we get him on, he's going to talk about that as well, right? We tend to be very positive and optimistic and wear the rose-colored glasses and feel like, oh yeah, everything's going to be fine. There's a 95% probability this is going to close. And the reality is that's not going to do anybody any good. So when the data is accurate, live, objective, defendable, and now it's in the CRM system, and now the CRM system can be used by management to help manage the pipeline, it's going to be best for everybody. So that's something to look forward to next week. And again, just sort of tying all these episodes together as far as how they flow and the way that they work. Please go backwards and forwards. And definitely for today, what we're going to do is dive into the management implications of this. So, what we're going to talk a little bit about today is that the tendency is to promote top sellers. Now, that actually happened with me because I was a SE manager and I was a SE in the SE role in pre-sales. And eventually I got promoted to be a manager of SEs because I was one of the, top performers. So the idea was is that I must be able to help manage people. And of course, there's some challenges with that. The challenges include the ability for managers to really manage, not just know what they're doing. And the problem is we tend to dive back into maybe helping mode, helping out the team, or instead of equipping them, it's the classic, teach somebody to fish and they can fish for life or whatever, or fish for them and now they're going to be dependent on you. So it's those types of things. But it really boils down to effectiveness, efficiency, other things like that. I know in my case, one thing that I experienced mainly in my SE roles was my sales counterparts were very often being cycled in and out, whereas I was sort of a continuum as a SE or pre-sales. Pre-sales tends to be more consistent and less turnover. In the sales ranks, especially back in the day, I don't see this as much now, but we'll talk about it when Brian comes on in a little bit, is that in sales roles, it seems like if the salesperson doesn't perform, well, then guess what? They're going to be cycled out. And I know for my one longtime customer, at the beginning, we would cycle out, maybe 10% of the salespeople each year. And maybe even more than that, maybe 15. They would cycle out, and there'd be a bunch of people removed from the roster of the program they're going through, and then new people coming on. And what I've noticed over the years is that number has gone down dramatically. So at least in the case of this one longtime client that I have, they've figured out ways to have their sales management do things that make people stay. Because I think you've all heard before that unfortunately, all too often, we wind up with not necessarily, you know, people don't quit their job, they quit their manager. And you all, if you think about it, even if you're not in a sales role, you've probably thought of that before. You know, there was that manager that just didn't cut it for you, wasn't working out. And so you were able to move on because you felt like it wasn't working. So morale could be affected and all kinds of different things. So those are some things to think about maybe as we get ready to go to the break. Think about ways that you have experienced that. And then when we talk with Brian, we'll be able to dig into that further. So please, again, check out teamsalesdevelopment.com for the information about this show and other shows. Look under the events tab. You can also check out, of course, the book tab and look up the book, which is the namesake for this show, Making Seamless Sales. And once again, for those of you that don't know already, the SE and the AM is capitalized because it is about pre-sales and sales working together better. So the SE and the AM working seamlessly, and that's what we cover. And there's tons of resources on the website that you can use to find out more about that. So as we're coming up on the break here, let's go ahead and get ready to have Brian join us as you think about things you're going through. Okay, there's my prompt for the break. All right. So one of the things that I want to point out about Making Seamless Sales is this book in particular, and for those of you that can see the video, and by the way, everybody, that if you access the website, you can find all the different ways that this is being streamed and also recorded. But one of the things I want to point out about this book is it is really designed for individual contributors to understand the other person. So for pre-sales to understand sales better, for sales to understand pre-sales better. And as a result, this book is really a workbook that helps at that opportunity and account level for them to work together better. There's a free worksheet available on my website on the book page that allows you to work through real sales opportunities together with your counterpart. Now, that's not to say this isn't for management, and Brian will be coming on after a break we're going to take very shortly here. But this is for sales management. This is going to help them with what you can help your team with. This isn't necessarily the sales manager's guide to that. That's something that I'll, be working on later. But people like folks like Brian, my guest, are the ones that are helping with that. So with that in mind, and looking forward to talking with Brian in a minute, let's go ahead and go to the break. We'll see you back as we dive into sales management and the importance of that for the team. See you back in about 2 minutes.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a purpose-driven individual looking for deeper healing, clarity, and growth? Welcome to the Expansion Room, a transformative space for purpose-driven individuals. I'm Siobhan Larice, host, licensed therapist, and coach. Join me every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
All right, everybody, welcome back from the commercial break. And I would like to welcome my guest, Brian Conway. Hello, Brian.
Hi Art, nice to see you again.
Likewise, likewise. So Brian is actually located in the UK, and because it's about 4 hours difference there, we're pre-recording this, but that's okay. You can still participate on the various streams, and we'll take a look at your comments later. Very quickly to introduce Brian. Brian's got 30 years of experience in sales, is a published author, sought after speaker, trainer, business coach, helps companies create high performing sales teams with a special focus, although not exclusively, mainly on the high tech sector. Brian's been in global training and coaching roles, working with pre sales and sales teams in the largest tech companies in the world, brands like Google, HPE, Lenovo, Dell, Adobe, TikTok, the list goes on, Microsoft and others. From his personal experience and having been a successful salesperson and sales manager, Brian has developed proven systems to quickly turn around struggling teams and individual contributors, often seeing dramatic improvements in as little as 6 weeks. His new Rep Rescue Playbook system is becoming the go-to program to improve quota attainment for for sales managers when reps are struggling and the numbers aren't where they want them to be. I've worked beside Brian as a fellow facilitator for Mastering Technical Sales and Innovice ESM. So please again welcome my friend and colleague Brian Conway. So good to have you here on the show.
Thanks, Art.
And I thought just to get started, Brian, maybe you could briefly help us out with how you got to where you are and the current focus.
Yeah. So like you, listening to your introduction earlier, I've been in the industry a long time when it was telecoms before it was even what it is today with AI, etc. And a lot of that career from an engineering background took me into pre-sales, which I did for a long time, as well as then field sales and sales management as well in both sides of that relationship, the SE and the AM. But for many years, I kind of discovered learning development. One of the companies I worked for had the opportunity to work in their learning development department for some time, and I just fell in love with personal development as much as I did sales. So it really was a blessing to be able to bring my passion for technology, people development, and selling together, and that's what I've done for many years now. As you said, all over the world, some of the big tech companies mainly, because that's my background. But what I've seen over the last few years, and it kind of really came to my attention early this year, is that has been this gradual decline in sales quota attainment across different sectors, not just technology. And this year, I was talking to a potential client, and we were talking about performance, and he said, "No, I've got one person on my team who's never done any more than 60% of their sales quota ever." I said, "Really? Surely not." He said, "Yeah, that's not uncommon." He said, "In fact, it's not uncommon talking to other sales managers and some of the people he knew." And I thought, that can't be true. So I just ended up doing a lot of research the early part of this year, and it does seem to be true. As I said, there's a lot of surveys now done by big companies that are empirically showing that there is this very low level of quota attainment. So as someone who's provided training to salespeople for many, many years, and now with so much information actually being at people's fingertips, there never has been more information readily available for free, as we know. And even AI, you could turn to AI now, because you've mentioned that as well, and even say, "Look, please help me, teach me how to become a better salesperson." Why is sales quota attainment at an all-time low? And I just feel a lot of the responsibility, not necessarily the fault, and I think it's an important differentiator here, but I think that a lot of the responsibility of maybe bringing this back lies with the sales managers, because it ultimately is their job to manage that team of individuals and help them reach their potential.
Right.
So that's how I got to where I am.
Yeah, and that's so needed. And in the past, and I think unfortunately it's still true, and this is part of this crisis that you're seeing that needs help. The bottom, 20% of the performance would just get fired. And
Yeah,
that, the inconsistency with their customers, the ramping back up of new resources and all that, it's a big deal. I had one client that um, where I was the consistency being in the pre-sales role of the time. And I think I
Yeah.
mentioned this on one of my earlier shows, but they literally had a plaque on the wall of all the salespeople that they had been through in like the 3 years prior to that. And they had the names of all the people. And they're like, we hope you're
Yeah.
not one of these. I go, no, 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 I'm here, I'm here for some consistency. But let's talk more about that then in terms of what is the impact of poor sales management, and then we'll get into some of the things that you wind up doing for them. But let's talk a little bit more about the lay of the land right now, why this is
Yeah.
something that should be paid attention to.
Well, as you said there, statistically 20%, the classic Pareto may be poor performing and you could work them out of the business. And a bit of churn is healthy. There's no doubt about that. But looking at a lot of the research, and these are companies like Inc. magazine and some of the big consultancy companies and a lot of the software companies like Salesforce and HubSpot and companies like that actually have salespeople using their CRMs, to actually manage performance, are seeing levels of attainment as low as 20%. That means it's the other way around. 80% are now missing targets. You can't engineer 80% of your sales team out every year. So it's kind of becoming broken. And there's a lot of reaction, I find, to those situations. I mean, replace somebody is one option. But that is very costly, both in time and money. And maybe time might even be the worst thing, because it could take nearly a year to ramp somebody up to performance, and you've lost a whole year's worth of potential sales. The other thing I'm seeing is this player manager role, which I'm really not a fan of. I know in certain circumstances, perhaps it can work. So, for example, if you just scale that, you're a startup, and as the business owner, you have been responsible for all the selling, and you're now trying to scale up and bring on a team, perhaps, then you're going to bring in one salesperson, then you've got to still be in that sales motion yourself. So there is a time when that role still exists. But when you're building a team, you really do want to extract yourself out of that role as soon as you can. Or if you are a sales manager of a team, I really don't think you should be in that player manager role. It is a recipe for disaster for numerous reasons.
Hmm. So yeah, because this is interesting, because it could be easy to say, well, it's the salesperson's fault for not achieving quota. And there's definitely some things when it comes to team collaboration and other things like that, that can start to get in the way, which is why I'm focused on helping them work together better
Yes,
to
yeah,
allow that. However, first and foremost, it's the manager's responsibility to help them with attaining the quota. And what I hear you saying is that one of the things that might be getting in the way, maybe more than before, is the idea of the player manager.
yeah.
Again, I was promoted from SE to SE manager, and it was hard to let the team fish for themselves. Your
It is.
tendency is to want to jump in, especially maybe in a pre-sales role, but in a sales role of any kind as a manager, jumping in. So why do you think that happens so much, and what's the implications of that?
There's a couple of things. I mean, one, make a really good point that a lot of sales managers are promoted up from being highly successful salespeople. So, and that in itself is a full-time job. So how you can then be a sales manager and a successful salesperson at the same time obviously creates a series of challenges. But the thing is, it's not a title, sales manager. It's a role. It's like, there's roles and responsibilities. So to split your attention has a number of problems. Now, the business might like it because they might think, well, I'm getting two roles for the price of one, but they're not. That's a false economy. Another reason why a lot of sales managers are now kind of stepping into this player manager role is to shore up a lot of that sales shortfall. They themselves, their compensation, their remuneration, their success, their recognition, all that sort of stuff, which is important to us as salespeople. It's why we love the buzz of the game.
Hmm.
That's all kind of threatened. So they think, well, I'll just step in, I'll take on some accounts, I'll show them how it's done. A bit of the ego kind of comes in as well. And of course, they can't be seen to fail themselves, because obviously that just gives the whole team an excuse to go, well, I told you. See, even you can't kind of close business. So they've got to close sales. And of course, that means more and more of their attention is going on their own sales activity to try and be successful in that sense, meaning less and less support and coaching and everything that's important as a sales leader. Less of that happens with their sales team. And of course, then their sales teams start to get resentful. I've seen this. I've heard people say, well, they just cherry pick all the best opportunities. They just take all the best leads. They've got the best accounts. If I had that account or that opportunity, I'd have been able to close it as well. So they start to justify their own failings, if I can call it that. So as you can see, it just creates so many subconscious, psychological, as well as practical issues that after a time, it just really starts to unravel very quickly. And then people just, like say, they leave the manager, not the company. They just think, well, they don't care, no interest in me. I'm not able to succeed here in this company. I'll just look for another job. And of course, the morale's down. And then other people see somebody else going maybe to a better job. And then they start thinking, well, maybe I'll just leave as well because I don't get any support either. And as I said, it just becomes a spiral of disaster, really. So that's why, as you can tell, I'm kind of really passionate about this role and why it's so poor, such a bad decision and fraught with so many problems.
Yes, and what I've found is that oftentimes, even with this movement from perhaps a top performer into manager, but even just managers in general, not a lot of emphasis specifically on them as a manager. I think a lot of times it's just thrown in along with whatever other sales things are going on. And both you and I have been in enablement roles. We are now. We know that, the successful clients that we've worked with had something specific for sales managers. And it was, top down in a lot of cases where the sales management even got trained before we got, or we helped train the sales managers before we got involved with training their team so that that can happen. So what is the dynamic there between the managers maybe not being equipped like that, and then even the team perhaps being a little bit disjointed on its own? Sounds like there's a lot of moving parts there. And what might an alternative be to that in terms of how management can do a better job overall? After the break, which we're coming up to in a minute or two here, we'll get into more of what you do and how that helps. But just describe a little bit about that scenario and those conditions.
Yeah. Well, as I said, they are very distinct roles and responsibilities, and that's the key. And then the roles of a manager really is to coach, support, remove the roadblocks, all that sort of stuff to enable their team to be successful. And I think that's one of the key transformations to think about as we go into the break, is that your success is no longer on your ability to close business. And as much as we love the deal and all that sort of stuff, you've got to recognize your success is now off the back of others. And that's a very different way of thinking. And therefore, your attention has to go into supporting, coaching, training, and giving people the time to train. If there was kind of one thing to think about as we go into the break, is so often, even when people are on training courses, and you'll have seen this as well, Art, I'm sure, is that people having to dip out because their manager has called them out of the training, and they're only there for 3 or 4 hours, not 2 or 3 weeks like we were on some of these training courses. And then their managers are pulling them out because there's an emergency or they need some questions. And so the managers aren't even respecting the investment that these individuals are making in their own personal development. Sometimes it can be as basic as that.
Yeah. Great points. All right. So right after the break, we'll continue with, what are the things that Brian has seen that's successful, how he helps enable that, and the benefits that can come. So we'll see you back in a couple minutes. Misalignment within your sales team or with a client stalls deals and creates unnecessary friction for you and the client, resulting in up to 37% lower win rate. If you're in pre-sales, sales management, or sales enablement, and you'd like to increase revenues, win rate, margins, client satisfaction, and stay competitive, this show is for you. Hi, I'm Art Fromm, host of the Making Seamless Sales Show. Please join me live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the Nonprofit Sector Connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
All right, welcome back. We're talking with Brain Conway, and we just discussed some of the situations that are challenges for managers, for sales in general, with the lack of attainment of quota, and some things that could be a result of, or that could be enabled by more focus on sales management and equipping sales management to be more successful and drive those close rates higher. So, Brian, let's talk a little bit about what you've started doing, and then we'll get into the, the inner circle that you've created and some of the other things. But we've all heard the expression of inspect what you expect. I believe you've got a little bit of a different twist on that if you want to lead into that,
Yes.
some of the things that you're saying that could be ways to implement impact.
Yeah. Yeah, so first of all, as I touched on earlier, we've got to it isn't necessarily the sales manager's fault. I said it's their responsibility in some of the things they're doing, but quite a lot of times that is pressures from above, or as I said, they just don't know what they don't know because they've never been given any formal guidance or training on how to be an effective sales manager. But there's a few tips that I do share, which can really make quite a big difference very, very quickly, which is why I said, you can see quick turnaround, especially compared to changing out somebody in the team. And a quick story. So I remember when I was in early part of my sales career, I had one of my best sales managers was a guy called Gary. And I remember one day I'd been on this training course and he came over and he perched on the end of the desk and he said, so, what are you working on? And we talked through some of the opportunities that I was working on. And he picked one. He said, so what would happen if they didn't do anything? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, if they don't do anything, they don't buy from us, they don't buy with a competitor, they just don't do anything, just carry on doing what they do. What would happen? I said, I don't know. And I was in pre-sales at the time. And he said, well, I know you're on the training course recently, and that is, the cost of doing nothing is something that's discussed. So when are you meeting them again? And I said, next week, etc. And they were, he said, right, well, let's catch up next week and see what you can find out. So I went to that meeting. As we all know, if we've ever asked that question, maybe not as direct as that, but with that being in mind, like always, you kind of find out all the risks and costs associated with the transformation that it's trying to make and what would happen if they didn't do it and all that sort of stuff. So it was really kind of eye-opening. So anyway, a week later, Gary comes over and he says, so, how'd you get on? What did you find out? I said, oh, yeah, brilliant, da, 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 da. He said, good, so you said you were working on this account as well. What would happen if they do nothing? I said, oh, I don't know. I'm meeting them tomorrow. I'll ask. Okay. So it kind of became a bit of sport almost. So I didn't feel, because a lot of sales managers will say to me, I don't want to micromanage. Well, I think you should do probably more micromanaging, but I don't mean on somebody's case every day, but just because it's the little things sometimes that can make a big difference. As they say, small hinges swing big doors. So focus on some of these little things. So anyway, this kind of bit of banter went on over only a few weeks, to the point where I'm going, every meeting, I'm going to ask this question so that when Gary asked me the question, I win, not him, so to speak. And that's why I said it was almost a bit of sport. So what I came to realize that actually that's what he was inspecting, were the application of some of those fundamental sort of sales discovery questions. And it led me to this realization that actually people will respect what you inspect. And that's the difference. So, kind of the play on what you just mentioned. People respect what you inspect. So if you just pick a few key elements of their sales activities and just coach them and reinforce and ask questions and give scenarios and maybe even shadow them if you can, if that's an option, and just give them some feedback around that particular area. But if somebody knows you're going to be talking about that one thing, it really brings that to the conscious competence, as we call it, and people really work on that. And that's why it can just be a matter of weeks before all of a sudden that new skill or competency is really nailed in, and you can move on to something else. You're not going to inspect that for the rest of their life. Once you see people doing it, as Gary did then, because I was answering his question before he'd even ask it. So I could move on to the kind of the next skill factor, and that. So to recognize that people will truly respect what you inspect can make a huge and very quick change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love what Gary did there, because instead of just inspecting a checklist, it was digging deeper. And
Yeah,
as soon as you said that in terms of what if they do nothing, so many different impacts start to come about. And I believe that by asking that, what Gary did a really good job of is sort of had you own that, because
yeah,
it's okay, by asking the client that, now they can sort of own that, like, are they really serious about this or not? And then me, as trying to drive the deal, I own it, because guess what? I don't want a do nothing outcome. I don't want a status
no,
quo outcome. That's what we're most always competing against, is do nothing. So that helps the client, it helps us. And in the end, what Gary wound up doing there is what our goal for all of us is the goal is client success. And then that wound
yes,
up being your success, which winds up being
yeah,
his success. So that was really
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah.
And I love the
And coming
twist.
back to your snapshot as well, it's just those few key questions that can really help you expand, and find the data you need to make that an effective opportunity, for everybody, as you said, and especially the customer. If I could better articulate the value of our proposition in line with those specific needs that I was able to identify, as you said, we all win. And that's just kind of one thing. The question I often then get after that is, well, what do I inspect though? That's the thing.
Right?
And the problem is we try and inspect often too many things, or it's just too generic or too, you need more, you need more in your pipeline,
Uh-huh.
or you need to do more prospecting, and even prospecting, you can break that down into so many elements, like who are they talking to, what are they saying, how often are they reaching, how many outreaches are they doing a day, how much follow-up, if any, are they doing it, what are they following up with, what assets and resources are they leveraging that could be used, white papers, videos, whatever it might be. So how, really breaking it down. So I say, you've really got to deconstruct the barriers that are really holding back the sale, and then just pick a couple of those at sort of maximum, really, to kind of inspect at any given time. And remember, you're going to be doing this over a period of time, so there will be a lot of things you ultimately help that individual improve. And that's whether it's sales or pre-sales. It's exactly the same, that situation, when I was in pre-sales at that time. So it doesn't matter. It just helped me have a much more business conversation with my clients, so I could provide a much better technical solution and work much more effectively with my account manager, which is, as is extremely important and beneficial to the whole process. So, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's important. I like about the idea of simplifying down what you're inspecting, and then eventually that becomes second nature.
yeah,
And I should say respecting, because I really like that little twist, the respecting. So that becomes second nature, but also make sure that what you are asking are things that matter, because you mentioned a couple things right there that, it used to be like, how many calls can you make? Well, maybe if you're doing transactional business, that might be the right thing to do. But if it's a more of a consultative sale, it's not about how
mm,
many calls, it's the quality of the call and what's the result of that. Same thing with
yeah,
demos. It's not about how many demos. So that's again where I love the idea of respect, because respect says there's more than just something that's being done. There's a reason behind it. And it's a
yeah.
helpful thing for the purpose of moving the deal forward. So what I don't know if you have a practical example toward that, or if you want to start to discuss a little bit about specific things around the rep rescue playbook.
Yeah, well, so the Rep Rescue Playbook, I will come back to that, but the Rep Rescue Playbook kind of came back because I wanted a practical playbook, guide. So it's not about territory planning or building a compensation plan or recruitment or HR issues and that sort of stuff. I wanted something that enabled sales managers either side of the organization, pre-sales or kind of field sales, to just tactically almost be able to start to turn around quickly their salespeople. So, for example, within there, there's three pillars to it. And the first thing is just, as I said, really deconstructing what's going on so you can find the thing that's broken. So you mentioned demos, for example. I've had people that have been just not able to move people through the sales process because their demo skills were poor, and we just not identified where this kind of choke point was. And fundamentally, it was, there's been different reasons, but as an example, somebody who just talking about features and functionality all the time, not talking about business value. So we reworked their demo and they got much better conversions. But then I had somebody else who had a similar problem, demos, fixed the demo, we thought, and nothing changed. And then realized actually it was the people they were inviting into the demos. It was their prospecting that was wrong. They were just bringing in kind of engineers and stuff, because they were interested. It was easy to fill the demos because the goal they'd been given was you need more people in your demos. So they just filled like pipelines. So people just fill it up with rubbish, to achieve the outcome that's being inspected, because that's what they will respect. So it's things like that. So the playbook is all about just creating a really tactical series of plays and frameworks that you can use to identify what's broken, put a plan in place to turn them around quickly, and then reinforce it as well. So there's repair, find out what's broken, to rebuild, so put a plan in place then to rebuild that, and then reinforce. And that's another thing that's often missed, is that reinforcement, because statistically only something like 13% they say of knowledge is retained after a training course. And it needs that reinforcement by a manager to make the transformation that people have invested in. So yeah, that's what it's fundamentally about.
Yeah, and that's why Gary kept asking you the same question over and over again. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I got it.
Yeah. And it was done in such a fun way as well. I didn't feel, we banter between us. It wasn't,
Yeah.
It wasn't, there was no pressure in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was helping you, it became obviously the way that helped you. And I think that's where some of the best managers are, is with tools like what you're providing and frameworks that help guide them through it. Now they can find the things that really are what helps their people, and ultimately that's helps them. And we can never go wrong when we have the client in mind as well. So some simple, measurable collaboration behaviors, and might I say, and we don't really have time to go into this in great detail, even reaching across. I think you did mention about not just, if you're a sales manager, don't just look from you down in your sales team. If you're pre-sales manager, don't just look from you down, look across at each other and what can you do to help collaborate and strengthen the team, right?
Yeah, because if you're struggling and only got 80% or got only 20% conversions, it's probably the same for the AM, the AM sales manager, or vice versa. So yeah, just talk and people are just a little afraid to expose themselves, which is why I created this inner circle that you touched on earlier. Because you're just kind of afraid sometimes you've been promoted into this new role, as you said, and therefore you don't want to kind of be seen to be no good at your job, especially when you've been really successful before. So it's kind of hard to open up sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so on that note, as we close out the segment, again, I really appreciate this. Great ideas that are actionable and much, much more available. Remind us how we can contact you. I'm going to have the links in the show notes and all that also, but how we can contact you, and just say just a little bit more about that management inner circle, because I think it's a really unique offering that you provide.
Yeah. So you can find me at represcue.co.uk, but represcue.co.uk/SMIC, Sales Manager Inner Circle, will give you access to this inner circle. So it's basically a community that I've created. I wanted to create a safe place for sales managers, as I said, to be able to network, support each other, share best practices, kind of talk shop away from the prying eyes of the SLT, so to speak, your senior leadership. Because you can't talk to your front line, even though it might have been your friends a month ago if you were promoted up, probably because they're causing most of your anxiety. And you don't, as I said, don't want to necessarily kind of expose yourself to you as a kind of new manager either. So it's just a safe place. It's at the time of recording anyway, I do intend to charge, but it's free of charge. So anybody who joins now will just be a kind of like a found what's I forgot the phrase there, but like
founding member.
a founding member, thank you.
Yeah.
So it'll be free, and there's resources in their checklists, and there'll be videos and a virtual coffee morning where we can just kind of get on a call, like an open office hours, shoot the breeze, ask questions. So really, as I said, just a safe place for sales managers to hang out with other like-minded people who have this goal to really excel in the role, and more importantly, just build a team of highly performant, highly successful individuals, because the buzz from that, I believe, is even greater than the buzz of closing a major deal.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. Everybody check out the links and join up with Brian. We'll talk again, Brian. Thank you so much for all of your help. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Love to see you again. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you.
On Frank About Health, we're not just talking healthcare. We're managing disruption and innovation. Over the last 4 years, I've taken you from epilepsy and COVID to mental health, caregiving, and now the front lines of healthcare transformation. Stay tuned for a healthier future as we bring on the innovators, professionals, storytellers, and advocates who show you how to own your healthcare every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, aka the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
Cheers.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
All right, everybody, welcome back. And again, thanks to Brian for that excellent segment. Highly recommend you go back and listen to it again, take notes, and then reach out to Brian. For this last segment, which I've dubbed Dear Artie, and I guess I'm still sticking with that for now. It's in the form of like a Dear Abby, if anybody's familiar with that. It was a columnist who would take viewers' life challenges and then they would be answered, in terms of some advice and stuff, is really a Dear Artie in terms of asking your sales challenges. And by the way, really appreciate the ones that I've received already. And if you would like to offer one up on the show, and certainly if you want it to be anonymous, I totally understand. You could just mention that. Please go to teamsalesdevelopment.com, go to the contact page, and there's a form there, and just put on there that you wanted to submit something for the show. Or even if it's not for the show and you just want some advice or some input, feel free to contact me. I'll be glad to reach out and we can have a chat about that. So there's a couple of things that have come up that I wanted to address, which were very aligned with our show for today. And the first one is from a pre-sales manager who said, I'm often caught in the middle between account managers and sales engineers because there's poor communication and there's trust issues. The salesperson expects the SE to do the demo based on what they think is needed by the client, and the SE expects sales to give better information to do a proper demo. I think many of us can relate to this situation. Here's the thing from the manager's perspective. I'm forced to mediate conflicts, which is difficult since I can't control the sales rep and my SE is looking for air cover. Some of the negative impact that this person mentioned was the ripple effect of internal friction leading to lost or closed deals, eroding trust between team members, damaging client experiences when the prospect feels unheard, and losses that went to do nothing. So a lot of the things that Brian and I talked about already today which for a sales manager, things that were mentioned and what Brian can help with would be part of that for sure. A couple suggestions that I have, and again, I don't get the opportunity to dig deeper into these necessarily. So here are some ideas and take them as you see fit. If it gives you additional ideas, that's great. Run with it. A couple of things that I think is one of the things that, like what Brian and I talked about, was working across the organization. So there's a lot that conspires against sales and SEs. That's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, is because there are so many different things and it can't be covered in a quick webinar, podcast, or even in a learning session. It took a book to lay it all out. But one of the things is, as a manager, to reach across to the other manager. Many times managers who are managing frontline people have another manager and then a SVP, and those don't often connect until very high up, where oftentimes it could be a ops person, it might be a marketing person, somebody like that. So I recommend take the initiative at whatever level of management you're at and have a sit down with your counterpart and come up with some rules of engagement. I think that laying out the expectations that you each have and having a common goal. So the easy common goal, and by the way, there's there's been a lot that's said about, hey, make sure you get to know your sales counterpart. Yes, that's all fine and good. I think it's deeper than that. It has to also be something on the operational level of how are you together working on client success. And specifically in my book, and you've heard me talk about this in other talks and webinars, is the idea of technical close and what that means. And it's more than technical win. So technical close is, yes, getting them agree that your solution's the right solution, but also that they commit to move forward at the exclusion of do nothing, and that they will take that to the business decision maker. And then for the sales counterpart, it's to get the business decision maker to say, yes, we're moving forward with your opportunity. It's kind of like what Brian was saying. What if they do nothing, right? So get them to say, yes, they will move forward at the exclusion of other projects they're working on based on the recommendation of the technical decision maker. So the client should be enabled and facilitated to have that discussion. What does that mean for sales? Well, that means we now know the goal that each is going for, what pre-sales is going for, what sales is going for. And that's to get that handoff by the client. That means for sales and pre-sales working together better. And as managers, we can drive that. One of the key things Brian said was keep it simple as far as what you're inspecting, so that they know what you respect, so that they will listen to it and do it because it's the right thing. I think a simple agreement, quote unquote, on what are we both doing together to drive the client forward might sound trivial, but try it and see what happens, because just that common engagement and agreement on the way that you're working together is one thing. Another thing is, it's kind of like, the principle of, if there's something wrong with you feel like somebody did you wrong, go directly to them. I would encourage that as a sales team, you encourage your team to talk with each other first and directly. Like, don't always just go up to the manager and then got to come back down. That's what this person is saying. I'm always getting pulled into these things. Well, I think as a manager, the idea would be is equip your team to enable them, to give them permission to talk with the other person and like work it out. And since they'll have a common goal, it's more likely that they can work that out. So rather than the AE and the SE and requiring a manager to sit in the middle, then make sure that they're working together. And then I think that giving your team some coaching on how to give constructive feedback, because sometimes it could come off as a blame game. Like, why aren't you giving me enough information? Why aren't you just doing the demo? And then that causes more divide. We already have enough conspiring against us. What can we do to try to teach some constructive feedback? Maybe teach some negotiation skills. Negotiation skills don't always have to be done for you and a client that you're trying to sign up. It could be a negotiation amongst the team members. And what I advocate is for interest-based negotiation, which is based on the book Getting to Yes and the Harvard Business Project. It's about what are our common interests. The AE is trying to achieve quota. The SE is trying to deliver a really great, and as Brian was pointing out, value-based presentation or demo. So for the SE, it can and should be help me to help you. Our common interest is moving the client together, forward together. So therefore, instead of, I need this from you, you need this, I need this from you, and going back and forth, what can we do together? And then set those proper guidelines, goals, common interests, and boundaries so that we know that we're not going to be going back up to management all the time. That's not healthy for anybody. So I believe this will lead to an encouragement back to this manager and anybody in management roles that Brian's talking about working with. Help equip your team to have those healthy relationships. It's not just a sales team and a pre-sales team. It's teams working together at the opportunity and account level. I believe that is going to generate better win rates. So that's what's in it for the salesperson. More confident teams. So that builds everybody's confidence up and trust in the client. The client will feel heard and understood through the sales process, and we will help them, with their buying process instead of us trying to figure out our sales process. So that's just some guidance that I would have along that lines. As a side note, and I talked about this as well earlier on my very first show, sales at the end of the day is all about persuasion and influence. And what we're doing is really selling each other on the idea of what we should do together. So between negotiation skills and basic sales skills of influence and persuasion, that can help everybody. So whoever wrote that in, I'd love to hear your feedback on what you thought about it, or anybody else that's applied pieces of that. Maybe it's just a reminder, or maybe it's something new, but I would say try that and see how far it can get you. All right, as we're wrapping up here then, thank you so much for participating in today's show. Thanks again to Brian for sharing all of his great ideas. Make sure you check out the show notes for ways to engage. Also, please check out the teamsalesdevelopment.com website. Have tons of resources on there, webinars and other things I've done. I even have a Ask TSD Anything bot. So you can ask the bot about, maybe sales methodologies or processes. Take advantage of that. It's got a lot of my stuff in there already, my book and other things like that. It can draw from all that. Also, please look up the book, Making Seamless Sales. There is a spot on the website for that. And the idea with Making Seamless Sales is getting pre-sales and sales to work together seamlessly in order to generate better outcomes for you and for the client. So there's tons of ideas there, including the consultative sales methodology. So feel free to contact me if you've got any plans for sales kickoff or other events that I can help you with, any of your consultative selling needs, workshops. Glad to discuss that. Remember to join next week when we talk with Chris Smith about CRMs shouldn't suck. So until then, have a great one, everybody. Take care and have a great week ahead.